Everyone, it is July 18. It is about 1 p.m. We're starting up with Ms. Violetta Zane, who's talking to us now from France. Yay. We're so happy to have Violetta with us. This is day 2 of a total of 5 days where she's talking with us about the primal point. It's a really interesting subject because the story of the Bab is something that a lot of people don't know about. People don't even know who he is around the world. And here we have not just as Baha'is, Baha'u'llah, but we have another religion that existed called the Babi religion. And here we are, we're learning about it and amazing historical points that Violetta was able to dig out that almost no one really knows about. And Violetta herself learned a bit. So here we are coming together. This is day 2. We're going to have this until Friday. Friday will be the last special session on the primal point. So if this is your first time watching, we welcome you to join tomorrow at 1 p.m. It's Eastern Daylight Time. If you're in Pacific, it's going to be 1 minus 3. It's 10 a.m. Pacific time. So what time is it over there, Violetta, for those of us in Europe?
It's 7 p.m. here.
7 p.m. So 7 p.m. in France. So we welcome all of you to join us tomorrow. Thank you so much, Violetta, for being here with us. And again, if you want to watch this, we're doing this in collaboration with the Firm Foundation Academy, the Desert Rose Baha'i Institute, and we're also posting this locally at clearwaterbaha'is.org. So all of you are welcome, please, to share this. The Zoom link is available. If you have questions, just reach out. We can help you to share it.
Wonderful. Welcome, everyone. So yesterday we looked at the childhood of the Bab, his birth, his infancy, his childhood, and his adolescence in great detail. And today we are going to hopefully look at 2 parts from the chronology. Part 2, which is his work as a merchant in Bushir in great detail and his life there, and his pilgrimage to the Atabat in Iraq. And I'm going to explain in detail what Atabat means. So this part 2 covers the life of the Bab from 1835 to 1842. The Bab during this time period is between the ages of 15 and 23. So it's really the youth of the Bab. And the first thing we're going to look at is his time in Bushir between 1835 and sometime between 1840, 1841, when he left for his pilgrimage to the Atabat. So to start off, Bushir is exactly 118 miles, 190 kilometers southwest of Shiraz, and it is a huge port. And that is where all the boats would come in. And the Bab was a merchant. So he dealt with boats and he dealt with caravans. And in Bushir, the Bab managed his family's trading house, despite his young age. He was about 15, 16 when he arrived. At first, the Bab was in partnership with his maternal uncle, and the family offices for their very large trading company were located in the Minandi Caravanserai in Bushir. Haji Mirza Siyyid Muhammad and his 2 younger brothers, Haji Mirza Siyyid Ali, who looked after the Bab after his father's passing, and Haji Mirza Hassan Ali, their children, their relatives, together, the family operated a family business of large-scale trading inside Persia from Shiraz, Bushir, and a city called Bandar Abbas. The Afnan family, Afnan is a term, it's a sort of branch, and we call all the male relatives of the Bab Afnans and all the male relatives of Baha'u'llah Ahsans. And the Afnans, which is a general term for the members of the family of the Bab, they traded internationally. They had a very successful import and export business to and from Muscat and Bahrain in the Persian Gulf, Ashgabat in Turkmenistan, Beirut, Lebanon, and Zanzibar in East Africa, Bombay, Calcutta, and Madras in India, and they traded as far in Southeast Asia as Hong Kong and Java. One of the Afghans even moved to Bombay in the 1830s to facilitate their trading with India. So according to the family archives, the Bab had commercial dealings in Yazd, Isfahan, Kashan, and Ghazvin. And commerce in the mid-19th century was very difficult, very arduous business. It was filled with risk. Ships constantly were threatened by pirates, and storms could sink a valuable shipment. Camel caravans often fell prey to brigands and highwaymen. The Bab lived in Bushir for 5 years, from the age of 15 to 20, working as a merchant. He had a commercial partnership with his uncle, Haji Mirza Siyyid Muhammad, for the first 2 years, but the rest of the time he worked independently on his own, in his own commercial transactions for the last 3 years of his stay in Bushir. The Bab gained wide notoriety throughout the region for his very meticulous attention to detail, his uncompromising integrity, his godliness, his fairness in all his transactions, his devoutness, his virtue, his piety, and also really his physical beauty. He was extraordinarily handsome. And during this time, the Bab was also engaged in writing and composing. And the evidences of his sanctity, on top of the wondrous verses that flowed from his pen, attracted not only the admiration, but also the envy and the jealousy of the learned men of Bushir. And we're talking about the Muslim clergy, the mullahs, the ulamas, the Sheikhul Islams, the sheikhs, all of those categories of learned men. So I want to talk a little bit about something that I found extremely exciting when I discovered this, is the Afghan family business of import and export. And I guarantee you, this is really new information that I found in this wonderful book I highly recommend called Resurrection and Renewal by Abbas Amanat. It was his PhD thesis, and he dug so deeply. This is the result of his research that I've repackaged. So we know from family business ledgers that the Bab and the Afghan family imported sugar, tea, coffee, grains, seeds, spices, indigo, and other vegetable dyes and natural gums, as well as various kinds of calico used to make curtains, women's clothing, tablecloths. They also imported English wool and cotton. They imported raw silk, carpets, tin, and other semi-processed metals, and sometimes even livestock from India. Their exports to India from Persia included carpets, dried rose petals, rose water, foodstuffs, dried fruits, shelled almonds and raisins, and sometimes gold coins. It's interesting to note, according to Dr. Amanat, that there are certain goods the Bab refused to trade. There are no references in any of the surviving family business records that the Bab ever bought or sold weapons, alcohol, or opium, which were major items of trade. The Bab was so pure in his dealings, even commercial, that he even refrained from dealing in stinky merchandise, such as sheepskin and asafoetida. It's a gum made from a variety of giant fennel, and it's very popular, gives a good taste to the food, but it really smells bad. It has a smell of rotting garlic. So that's quite interesting. So here's a little bit of a story on the uncompromising integrity of the Bab, which I found just extremely moving, very moving. So on one occasion, there was a Bushir merchant whose name was Haji Mirza Abul Hassan Yazdi, so originally from Yazd. He entrusted the Bab with merchandise that was supposed to be sold while he left the city to go on pilgrimage to Mecca and Medina. In his absence, the price of the merchandise fell, and the Bab did not sell it at a lower price than his client had expected. Several months later, when Haji Mirza Abul Hassan returned from pilgrimage, he was surprised to find that the Bab gave him 175 tumans more than he expected on the merchandise that he had asked him to sell. When he asked the Bab about it, the Bab explained that if he had sold the merchandise at its highest price, that's the price it would have fetched. And so he compensated his client. And this is from the Bab himself. Of course, anything that is not in selections from the writings of the Bab should be considered pilgrim notes. But this is what he reportedly said to his client. He said, "What I have sent you is the entirely your due. There is not a single farthing in excess of what is your right. There was a time when the trust you had delivered to me had attained this value. Failing to sell it at that price, I now feel it is my duty to offer you the whole of that sum." The Bab's client insisted, entreated him to not give him the extra money, but the Bab wouldn't hear of it and refused to accept the 175 tumans extra back. During the 5 years during which the Bab engaged in commerce in Bushire, he mingled and associated with people of all kinds of walks of life, from the ulama to the merchants and shopkeepers, and he dealt with everyone in a way in every gathering that people just were amazed at his qualities. The Bab's trading accounts between 1835 and 1840 show that the family's trade was mainly with the central and southern regions of Persia. And his own notes regarding transactions with local merchants in Isfahan, Kashan, and Tehran were really imports of fabric, tea, sugar, spices in exchange for agricultural and food exports. And these accounts show that the Bab was very skilled in accounting and bookkeeping. And he was deeply familiar with the merchant network of the south of Persia and Bushire in particular. So this another aspect of the Bab's stay in Bushire was his piety. And the hottest season of the year in Bushire lasts about 4 months, from May to October. And the average daily temperatures during that time, in August, let's say, in the middle, when it's the hottest, are around 98 degrees Fahrenheit. So 37 degrees Celsius. And the Bab would brave this excessive, oppressive summer heat and always say his prayers on the roof of his house for several hours every Friday at the hottest time of day. And even though he was completely exposed to the scorching rays of this noonday sun, he turned his heart to God and communed ceaselessly with his beloved, entirely oblivious to the intensity of the heat. And actually, he prayed a large portion of the day, because for sunrise to midday, and from dawn to sunrise, and then from midday to late afternoon, the Bab was constantly in meditation and prayer. And he would turn his gaze to Tehran, where Baha'u'llah was living, and the Bab would greet the rising sun each day, overflowing with love and joy. And to the Bab, this rising sun was a symbol of the day star of truth that was dawning on the world, really. And in these moments of communion, the Bab was almost entrusting his message of love and yearning to his concealed beloved. You have to think that now, as an adult, he's an adult in Bushire, and he's praying so much. And he is a manifestation of God, even though he hasn't received the first intimation of revelation from God. This is not a person like a normal human being. So he knows something. We don't know the inner life of messengers of God, but we know that they are not like us. The people in Bushire.
I have a question again then.
Yeah.
You said in one of your remarks that he took meticulous records and he wrote and composed writings.
Yes.
Okay. Again, would this be considered revelatory writing? And would it be canonical to the,
A lot of them
if
are
it
lost.
exists?
A lot of them are lost. A lot of them are lost. I think that
And you say that rather off the cuff. What is your proof that they're lost?
That they are not found, that they do not exist at the Baha'i World Center archives, the information that we have that they are lost comes from probably the World Center, because the information that they are lost is found in the writings and the papers of scholars of the faith, like Dr. Mujan Momin, Dr. Nader Saidi, Dr. Abbas Amanat, all those scholars. When they say that these writings are lost, then this is something you can take to the bank, because these are scholars and researchers that are in contact with the World Center. And
even though you say he was meticulous in keeping records.
The records, I believe we have, because Dr. Abbas Amanat consulted them. So these exist. These records do exist. Of course, they're not available to us because they are, you understand how special they are, and they are extremely fragile, and they are kept safekeeping, most likely.
Okay. I hope you don't feel that I'm pushy or anything like that, but this is the very first time I've heard any of this. So, I mean, I've heard the record of him paying more than what the price was, but some of these other details that you're giving, this is the first time I'm hearing it. So I need to understand that. Thank you very much.
Sure. Now, I want to just tell everyone that if Jeremiah can maybe stick the link for part 2 of the primal point in the chat, you can go there, and the footnotes have very meticulous sources for every single thing that I say. These are my words because I have a certain way that I like to say things that is not the way that they are written when they are written in the Dawnbreakers. And I am not the type of history writer that quotes extensively from sources. I generally quote dialogue because I am just a huge fan of movies. And when I write my chronologies, I'm writing kind of a screenplay. I'm doing the action, I'm giving details, I'm giving temperatures, distances, I'm putting you in the mood, and I'm giving you dialogue, which all of the dialogue obviously is Pilgrim Notes, unless it comes straight from the writings of the Bab. But I'm also a serious writer of history, and I give due to every single scholar that has contributed information that I put. And sometimes in one story, I have melded maybe 6, 7 papers, quotes, articles, books. These are not all from one source, sometimes. And so the footnotes are available on the website at the bottom of the page, and they are referred to by the name of the vignette. I call them vignettes. So these little vignettes, Communion Transports of Delight, if you go to the end of the page, you will be able to see Communion Transport of Delight and sources, and all the sources. Now I see that John has his hand patiently up. John, go ahead.
Well, I've read this many times about them being lost. It's published in multiple places. I would not be surprised if it's not in by The Guardian. Add him to the list. These were tumultuous times. This was the beginning days where no one knew much of, and travel, like you said, was rough. This was explained as to why they're lost. And also, the Babis are being constantly attacked, and any papers are being destroyed by the clergy. So I think it's in God Passes By.
Yeah, thank you. Excellent point. And I have probably one of the most exciting parts of the chronology for me is after the Bab returns from pilgrimage. I have this incredible story about how he reveals and what happened to a ton of his writings. And I'm just keeping that as a cliffhanger. We're going to do that maybe in the next couple of days. So let's get, I just want to share a few things. Now, I want to mention to you all that I am going to be skimming through this because this is a 300-page chronology. I'm not going to read every word. I really do want you to go to the website and read the stuff and get the sources and write to me. You know, this is, I'm available. Just write to me and tell me if you have questions, email me. I'll give you my email at the end of this session. So I think I'm going to skip this one. This section is really just about the beauty of the Bab. He was just very, very physically beautiful. His hair was jet black and he had dark brown eyes that shined like stars. He had a very luminous face. You have to imagine, if you've ever seen the photograph of Abdu'l-Baha as a young man in his 20s in Edirne, if you just go back to that picture after this talk, or even pull it up right now on the internet, and you just see how perfect his face is, his skin. It's just absolutely like porcelain. You can't see a pore there. That's the kind of face, I think, that you have to imagine that the manifestation of God is the most perfect form of human being that exists. His face was perfectly symmetrical. He had a simple and humble but majestic bearing, and he lived a pure and spotless life. He was devoted to loving and serving humanity, and he reflected the light of the Spirit, but he also radiated it to those around him. And his countenance was filled with happiness, and it really seemed to people around him that the Spirit of God shone through him. This is a section about his prayers, and I'm going to also skip that one because we made a very good point about his devotions in one of the earlier vignettes. This is absolutely one of my favorite stories about the Bab. I just love this story, and it's filled with dialogue. It's very exciting. It's the kind of story I love. Abdu'l-Baha stated in the course of his 5 years of Bushir that the Bab, and this is a quote from Abdu'l-Baha, he achieved extraordinary things and thoroughly demolished the foundations of people's corrupt practices. There was a prevalent custom among the merchants in Bushir that after having conducted a deal, they would renege on the offer, then go back to the person they made the deal with and renegotiate a better deal. So merchants of Bushir purchased a large quantity of indigo dye from the Bab. They signed off on the deal. They moved the dye to their offices, and then they came back and they canceled the agreed upon deal so that they could haggle for a better deal. And the Bab simply refused to participate in the corrupt practice. He said, "You made a bargain, signed papers, and the transaction has been completed. I will not give a discount and will not renegotiate." The merchants insisted, and the Bab did not change his position. "What I said is final." The merchants pleaded, "It is the custom of the country." The Bab was unmoved. "Many of these customs are wrong and will soon be abolished." Now you can see here, will soon be abolished. Will soon be abolished. That is his dispensation. To me, why else would he say will soon be abolished? No matter how much the dishonest merchants insisted, the Bab would not agree. They were so obstinate that the Bab offered to take the merchandise back. "If the price is high, return the merchandise, as I will not barter." They insisted 3 more times that it was the custom of the land, until finally the Bab put a stop to the charade and said, "I am ending this custom." Now you see why Abdu'l-Baha said earlier that he thoroughly demolished the foundation of people's corrupt practices. "I am ending this custom." The Bab ordered the indigo dye returned to his shop. Abdu'l-Baha affirmed that through his example and his unflinching integrity, the Bab changed many corrupt practices among the merchants of Bushir during his 5-year stay in the port city. Shortly after the indigo dye incident, one of the Bab's uncles arrived in Bushir, and the merchants who had failed to corrupt the Bab complained about his nephew. They said, "He has ruined our reputation." So just to be clear, because of his honesty and his integrity, the Bab ruined these merchants' reputation. We had a deal on dyes. However, as customary, we wished to renegotiate, but he did not comply. He arranged for the goods to be brought back from our store. This is a great insult to us as merchants. You should counsel him not to repeat such offenses. The uncle spoke to the Bab about the incident. Why do you refuse to yield to people's wishes and disrupt the established customs of the realm? The Bab said, even now, should they wish to bargain after a transaction is completed, I would refuse again. Abdul Baha had recounted this story to Haji Mirza Habibullah Afnan, who is the person who wrote the story of the faith in Shiraz and Fars that I used as one of my main sources, along with Resurrection and Renewal, to write and give color and texture to these early years of the Bab in details that are not common. I don't know if it's the whole history of Shiraz and Fars that is translated or part of it, but that was one of my main sources. And so he spoke to Abdul Baha, Haji Mirza Habibullah Afnan, and Abdul Baha told him prior to his declaration, the Bab announced that he would change many of the accepted ways. So now we have something kind of exciting. This is one of the writings of the Bab during this early period of his life, is called the Risaliye Fiqhiyye, the Treatise on Law, which has not survived. I believe that the eminent Orientalist A.L.M. Nicolas, who is French, he may have read it because he writes about it as if he had read it. And he said that this treatise of the Bab demonstrated, and this is a quote from A.L.M. Nicolas, a true piety and a knowledge of things Islamic, which seemed to point towards a brilliant future in the ranks of Shiite orthodoxy. So this is the first real treatise of the Bab that we have a name for, but it does no, we may find it yet one day, but it has not survived. So that's the end of the Bab's life in Bushir, friends. Now he's leaving Bushir. This is a photo of Bushir from the sky. It's a 1973 photo, but you see how it's really this port city, you know, just the ships come in and the people dealt with the ships, and the offices of the Bab were somewhere in there. So I want to have just the Bab decided to leave and go to the Atabat. And the Atabat is something very special. It's a, you know, there's Sunni Muslims and Shia Muslims. And the Shia Muslims, for them, the 12 Imams are really important. And they have 11 Imams that are buried. And their shrines are everywhere. You know, their shrines are in Iran, in Mecca, in Saudi Arabia, in Iraq. But, you know, 6 of the Imams, these holy Imams, 6 of them are buried in Iraq. The shrine of the first Imam, Imam Ali, is in Najaf. The shrine of the 3rd Imam, Imam Hussein, is in Karbala. The twin shrines of the 7th and 9th Imams are in Kazimine, which is now part of Baghdad, but at the time was a separate city, just 2 or 3 kilometers or a mile away. And the shrines of the 10th and 11th Imams are in Samarra, which is north in Iraq. So for someone to do the Atabat, the word Atabat means supreme shrines. For someone to do the Atabat means he goes to Iraq and he visits probably all 6 shrines. Now, we do not know how many of the shrines the Bab visited when he went to Iraq. We know he went to Karbala. We don't know if he went other places. So after 5 years in Bushir, the Bab wrote several letters to his uncles saying, I plan to visit the Atabat. One of you should come to Bushir and take over the business so I can commence my journey to the Atabat. The uncles procrastinated, they didn't respond, they didn't comply immediately, and the Bab just really wanted to leave. He had to leave, and you will understand why he had to leave when you find out what happens in Iraq. But he had to leave, absolutely. And so what he did is he settled his accounts with everyone, he prepared a detailed ledger, he sealed the books, he left them in the office, He sealed the entrance to the office and entrusted the key to the custodian of the building with instructions to give the key to whichever of his maternal uncles arrived first from Shiraz. And then after that, the Bab wrote to his uncles in Shiraz and he laid out the steps that he had taken and he left for Iraq, left for his pilgrimage on the Atabat. And when the latest letter of the Bab reached his uncles, Haji Mirza Sayyid Muhammad was anxious and he was worried that what the Bab had done would reflect poorly on their name as merchants. So Haji Mirza Sayyid Ali, who had been his guardian from a young age, was so overconfident and just not overconfident, just supremely confident that the Bab had done everything perfectly. He just knew, because he knew their nephew was above reproach. And Haji Mirza Sayyid Ali told his brothers, rest assured, I know him. And our nephew does not do anything wrong. I am certain that he's arranged people's accounts before leaving. So obviously, Haji Mirza Sayyid Muhammad was panicked and he left for Bashir, got the key from the caravanserai's custodian. He saw the seal on the door. He opened the seal, broke the seal, and he examined the books and he realized all the accounts relating to every single one of their clients were accurate. And he sent a glowing report back to his brothers in Shiraz, and he lavished praise and gratitude on the Bab for his resourcefulness and his meticulousness.
So it looks like we.
Sorry?
Again.
So now we are going to look at the pilgrimage of the Bab between 1841 and 1842. He spends a year in Iraq. And I've divided this in two. I have a beginning portion of his life in Iraq up until he meets Sayyid Kazim. And then I'm going to break and I'm going to tell you about Sheikh Ahmad and Sayyid Kazim in summarized form. And then I'm going to resume and tell you the end of the story of the Bab and the Atabat and his pilgrimage in Iraq and his meeting with Sayyid Kazim and then his eventual return to Persia. And then the reason that I did this is because I love the Dawnbreakers, but I always had this feeling that these first two chapters that deal with Sheikh Ahmad and Sayyid Kazim, they're obviously important. But when I began writing my chronology, I was like, I'm going to do this the way I want. And the way I want to do it is I want to do the childhood of the Bab, I want to do the youth, and I want to do his work. And then I want to just put Sheikh Ahmad and Sayyid Kazim in perspective and then continue with the life of the Bab. The Bab is central to my chronology. I didn't want to distract from it. So this is the Atabat right here. You have Najaf and Karbala and Kazimine and Samara. I put Karbala a little larger because that's where everything regarding the Bab is going to be happening. You can see that Iraq borders Persia. And you can see Shiraz, where the Bab was born, and you can see Bushir, the port where he left. So he would have gone from Bushir and sailed the Persian Gulf to the port in Iraq, and then traveled then on a caravan probably to get to, who knows, maybe he did go to Najaf, Kazimine, Samara. I hope one day we find out. So we know that the Bab spent 11 months in Iraq, so not a full year, 11 months. And we know that 8 of those months were in Karbala and 3 were elsewhere. We don't know where. So every year, thousands of Shia Muslims make their pilgrimage to the shrine of Imam Hussein, the martyred grandson of the Prophet Muhammad, and they read lengthy prayers at his holy tomb in the city of Karbala. When the Bab arrived in the holy city for his pilgrimage, his deep devotion at the shrine of Imam Hussein deeply affected many of the Muslim pilgrims who saw him. He was Muslim too at the time, of course. Anyway, as he prayed with his very characteristic devotion, which we saw in Bushir, the ardency of his prayers involuntarily attracted a lot of attention. The attention of those around him who interrupted their own prayers to look at this young Siyyid. Now, this Siyyid, they would know, was descended from Prophet Muhammad himself because the Bab wore a green turban and often a green cloak or a green sash, those emblems that are reserved for those who are directly descended from the Prophet Muhammad. And although the Muslim prayers that were existing that glorified the Imam Hussein and were meant to be recited like tablets of visitation at his grave were extraordinarily beautiful, the Bab's own prayers were sublime, and people were mesmerized. Mullah Sadiq, oh gosh, if someone could do a really quick Google search, I think Mullah Sadiq in Muqaddas, I think he's a letter of the living. Just someone can, Jeremiah, maybe if you can look, letter of the living, Mullah Sadiq in Muqaddas. I'd like to know if I'm right about that. So this is the inside of the shrine of Imam Hussein in Karbala, where Mullah Sadiq meets the Bab, which is the subject of this vignette here, the story. The Bab stayed in Karbala for 8 months, and many of the people who were drawn to him during this time were because of his utterances and the holiness of his life. I mean, the way he lived his life, his purity and his chastity and his holiness were so obvious that people recognized them. So you have to wonder how chaste and how holy and how pure can someone be for people to readily notice that about them, you know? I mean, that's something to meditate on privately. And there's some reports that given the significant length of time that the Bab spent in Karbala, at a time when Mullah Hussein, who's a future letter of the living, the first letter of the living, was also present in that city, that they met. Modern historians believe that it is impossible that they did not meet. But if they did meet, they did not really speak in depth. They would have met in the same room and seen each other from a distance, but they did not have a conversation until Mullah Hussein arrived in Shiraz. But for the purposes of this chronology, I'm going to use the timeline of events that is supported by Shoghi Effendi and recounted by Nabil and the Dawnbreakers. And so Mullah Sadiq vividly described his impression of the 21-year-old Bab. One day, I entered into the mosque of the Confessor of the Faith, and I saw there a young man absorbed in profound meditation. His attitude was such, his piety so evident and so manifest, the tears which flowed from his eyes were so sincere that I felt myself invincibly attracted to him. Not wishing to interrupt him in his devotions, I seated myself in a corner and awaited the conclusion of his prayers. The more I looked at him, the more I was conquered by his noble air, his modest countenance, and something I cannot describe that seemed to be emitted from his entire person. And I think this is really important. This is a description of a manifestation of God before his declaration, before he has the first revelation from God in his own soul. He hasn't yet been received revelation, but his body is emitting these spiritual qualities that are so powerful that they affect the atoms around him and the people around him. When the Bab finally left the shrine, Mullah Sadiq followed him, but the Bab would not respond to him until they had left the precinct of the mosque. And he humbly and courteously asked Mullah Sadiq to forgive him for not responding earlier, as he considered the mosque too sacred a place to think or speak of anything but God. Mullah Sadiq invited the Bab to his home that Friday to meet his teacher, Siyyid Kazim Irashti, and the Bab replied, "What greater happiness and joy is his who takes his place at a gathering than to hear mention the most exalted light of God." Not only did the Bab accept Mullah Sadiq's invitation, but he also met Siyyid Kazim before the gathering that Mullah Sadiq invited him to. We're going to look at both of the stories in detail, but I'm just going to make a break and I'm going to explain to you why it is so significant that the Bab met Siyyid Kazim, why that meeting is so significant. And to do that, I'm going to go back in time and I'm going to tell you a little bit about who Sheikh Ahmad and who Siyyid Kazim were. So Sheikh Muḥammad-i-Iṣfahání was born in 1753 in a town named Ahsai, which you can see at the very bottom of the screen here, Al-Ahsa in Saudi Arabia. And he belonged to an ancient tribe called the Banu Sahr. Sheikh Ahmad was a visionary. He's described by Abdul Baha as a resplendent star, and by Shoghi Effendi as a luminary, as well as the herald of the Babi dispensation. So when Sheikh Ahmad was growing up in Saudi Arabia, he was looking at his beloved Shia faith, and he saw that its unity was shattered, its strength was sapped, its purpose was perverted, its holy name was degraded, and he felt a divine calling to regenerate the Shia faith. He felt a calling to regenerate the entire Shia faith. So at the age of 40, not young, at the age of 40, he left for the holy cities of Najaf and Karbala. And he went through all of the schooling he needed to be respected. He had formal theological training, and within a few years, he was a full-blown mujtahid, an expert in Islamic law, who was highly respected for his superior learning and wisdom. And he began to guide people to these inner truths that he was feeling through divine intuition, divinely inspired intuition. He started expounding on the secrets and mysteries of the Quran, and he began to preach, and a circle began to form around him of devoted, earnest students. And Sheikh Ahmad's constant themes were the near advent of the deliverer of the latter days, the promised one of the world of Islam, the promised Qaim, hailing from the house of the Prophet Muhammad, the Mahdi. And so these were the themes that he really wrote a lot about. And Sheikh Ahmad asked the Shia divines of the holy cities of Iraq to grant him a license of mujtahid so that he could interpret religious law and formulate authoritative answers to legal questions. And he became a mujtahid, and his fame spread through Iraq and Persia because Iran is a Shia country. So once he felt he'd achieved his purpose in Iraq, Sheikh Ahmad was again divinely intuited. He was drawn to Persia with this very mysterious divine voice that was calling him to the land of Persia. Go to Persia. And he left without informing anyone and without telling them why. And he visited Persia. And he didn't visit Persia for a little bit. He visited Persia for 5 years. 5 years. He was there between 1817 and 1821. He was in Persia when both Baha'u'llah and the Bab were born. And he traveled all over Persia. Wait, hold on. Sorry. My apologies. He was there for a long time because he actually, it's not just 1817. He arrived in Persia in 1806. So that's a little typo on my part. So obviously his outer purpose was to go and pray in the shrine of the Imam Riza in Mashhad, which is a holy, holy shrine. One of the other imams, I don't remember which imam he is, but this is and there's like another shrine in Saudi Arabia. So Sheikh Ahmad knew, because he had been so immersed in the Quran and the scriptures and the hadiths and the traditions and everything, that he knew that the promised Qaim's arrivals was imminent because of the prophecies that date them. And he traveled to Persia with the object of meeting people that he could teach and explain and spread the gospel about the imminent arrival of the promised one. He was looking for pure souls. And so he visited Shiraz, the city where the Bab would be born in a few years. And later, through his travels, he extolled the city of Shiraz in passionate terms, and he lavished a tremendous amount of praise on Shiraz. And everyone who heard him was very stunned. Why Shiraz? And Sheikh Ahmad would just tell them, wonder not, for ere long, the secret of my words will be made manifest to you. Among those shall be a number who will live to behold the glory of a day in which the prophets of old have yearned to witness. Sheikh Ahmad spent a long time in Yazd. Yazd is a really amazing city. If you go to the Clearwater YouTube channel, there is a talk that I gave for the Clearwater Baha'is called The Abode of Devotion, the City of Yazd. If you see that, you'll see how special Yazd is. Yazd is a really incredible city. There were a lot of Zoroastrians in Yazd, and it's a really amazing city, entirely made of dried earth, and it's wedged in between two deserts. And the bulk of his years in Persia was spent in Yazd. And that is where he met a 20-year-old amazing young man named Siyyid Kazim-i from Rasht, who had walked all the way from Rasht to Yazd to see him. And as soon as Sheikh Ahmad met him, he appointed Siyyid Kazim his successor. And he welcomed him with so much love and so much warmth. And he said, how eagerly have I awaited for you to come and deliver me from the arrogance of this perverse people. And then after Yazd, Sheikh Ahmad visited Iran and went to Khorasan, Mashhad, Nur, Tehran, Kermanshah, all the while spreading the glad tidings of the arrival of the Promised One. He would say to people, ere long this earth be turned into a paradise, ere long will Persia be made the shrine round which will circle the peoples of the earth. Sheikh Ahmad left astonishing prophecies about the births of the revelation of the Bab and Baha'u'llah. In 1819, the year the Bab was born, Sheikh Ahmad lost his son, whose name was Sheikh Ali. To his disciple who mourned his loss, Sheikh Ahmad said, grieve not, O my friends, for I have offered up my own son, Ali, as a sacrifice to the Ali whose advent we all await. To this end, I have reared and prepared him. He even knew the name of the Bab. So Sheikh Ahmad returned to Karbala. And after 15 years in Iran, and he went there with Sayyid Kazim. They arrived in 1821, and they continued their teaching and proclamation work, but for a few years, 5 years. And then in 1826, shortly before Sheikh Ahmad's death, he left Karbala for the last time. And he finally disclosed to Sayyid Kazim, his chosen successor, the secret of his mission and left him very powerful last words. You have no time to lose. Every fleeting hour should be fully and wisely utilized. You should gird up the loin of endeavor and strive day and night to rend asunder by the grace of God and by the hand of wisdom and loving kindness, those veils of heedlessness that have blinded the eyes of men. For verily I say, the hour is drawing nigh. The hour I have besought God to spare me from witnessing, from the earthquake of the last hour, will be tremendous. You should pray to God to be spared the overpowering trials of that day, for neither of us is capable of withstanding its sweeping force. So, the quote isn't finished, but I just want to say both Sheikh Ahmad and Sayyid Kazim died before the declaration of the Bab. Sheikh Ahmad died in 1826, and Sayyid Kazim died in December 1843, just 6 months before. So that I'm going to read that last part. It makes a lot of sense when you know that. So I'm just going to read that last part again. You should pray to God to be spared the overpowering trials of that day, for neither of us is capable of withstanding its sweeping force. Others of greater endurance and power have been destined to bear this stupendous weight, men whose hearts are sanctified from all earthly things and whose strength is reinforced by the potency of his power. So Sheikh Ahmad was 81 when he died in 1826, and he was buried near the city of Medina, where the Prophet Muhammad died, and he was buried near the Prophet Muhammad. So now, from his death to 1841, which is when Siyyid Kazim is going to meet the Bab, I'm going to tell you the story of Siyyid Kazim-i Rashti, the young Persian man from Rasht who took over from the Saudi Sheikh Ahmad after his passing. It's a painting of, it's an anonymous portrait from the 19th century of Siyyid Kazim. Siyyid Kazim was 33 years old when Sheikh Ahmad passed away and he took over his school. And he faced great opposition against his teachings. And he had to suffer and withstand constant intrigues, powerful enemies who attempted to undermine him at every turn. And he also gained devoted followers, such as our very beloved, wonderful Mullah Husseini Bushrui, the one who was destined to witness the revelation of the Bab. For several years prior to the Bab's arrival in Karbala, Siyyid Kazim, who could feel the approaching hour of the declaration of the Promised One, had increasingly focused his discourse on the signs of the Qaim's manifestation and his character and appearance. He left detailed information. He said he is of noble lineage. He is a descendant of the Prophet of God, of the family of Hashim. He is young in age and he is possessed of innate knowledge. His learning is derived not from the teachings of Sheikh Ahmad, but from God. My knowledge is but a drop compared with the immensity of his knowledge. My attainments, a speck of dust in the face of the wonders of his grace and power, nay, immeasurable is the difference. He is of medium height, abstains from smoking, and is of extreme devoutness and piety. The Bab arrived in Karbala as part of his Atabat pilgrimage in 1841, and one morning after his arrival, Siyyid Kazim, unwarned and unprompted, went to meet him. So now we're going to look at the rest of the Bab's Atabat. This is the Atabat part 2. The Bab meets Siyyid Kazim-i Rashti in Karbala. So now you understand why this is significant, because his entire life, Siyyid Kazim, has been to prepare the world for the coming of the Bab. And now the Bab arrives and he's going to recognize who the Bab is. He's going to recognize the promised Qaim of Islam, who Sheikh Ahmad and he have been telling people about for 50 years, since 1793. So that day in question, Siyyid Kazim asked Sheikh Hassan-i Zunuzi, one of his students, who would be a faithful disciple of the Bab until the very end, until his martyrdom, to accompany him. He told Sheikh Hassan-i Zunuzi, a highly esteemed and distinguished person has arrived. I feel it is incumbent upon us both to visit him. Morning light had just broken, and the master and the student and his disciple made their way through the streets of Karbala, still probably a little bit dark, and they reached a house and saw a youth standing at the door, wearing a green turban, an indescribable expression of humility and kindliness on his face. The Bab quietly approached Siyyid Kazim and lovingly embraced him. Siyyid Kazim expressed profound reverence towards the youth, receiving his expressions of affection and respect speechlessly with his head bowed. Towards the Bab led the two men to the upper floor of the house and to a room that was filled with flowers and a delightful scent, and he asked them to be seated. The Bab filled a silver cup to overflowing and he handed it to Siyyid Kazim, saying, "A drink of pure beverage shall their Lord give them." This verse from the Quran were the only words spoken during this meeting. Siyyid Kazim took the cup with both hands and drank it, and soon after the Bab rose from his seat and bade his guests farewell. Sheikh Hassan-i Zunuzi was speechless. He could not stop thinking of Siyyid Kazim's profound respect towards the Siyyid, of the youth's shining face, the dignity of his bearing, the delicious smell of the beverage that he had offered, And the fact that his master, his teacher, had drank from a silver cup, the use of which was strictly prohibited in Islam. So 3 days later, the Bab is present during a lecture by Sayyid Kazim. 3 days later, the Bab responded to that invitation of Mullah Sadiq from before, when we started talking about Sheikh Ahmad and Sayyid Kazim. He'd invited him to meet his teacher, and he went. So he arrived on Friday, and the master, so Sayyid Kazim, was lecturing to his assembled students from the pulpit. It was a full house, and because there were no other available seats, the Bab sat close to the entrance and just sat in his usual distinctive modesty. As soon as his eyes fell on the Bab, Sayyid Kazim became completely silent, just stopped what he was saying. Everyone present was astonished, and one of his students begged him to continue his unfinished argument, but Sayyid Kazim just said, "What more shall I say?" And then in front of that full house of his students, he turned straight to the Bab and said, "Lo, the truth is more manifest than the ray of light that has fallen upon that lap." And at that very moment, a ray of sunlight fell on the Bab's lap. The same student who had asked Sayyid Kazim to continue his lecture asked why he never revealed the name or the identity of the promised one. Sayyid Kazim pointed his finger to his throat, implying danger of death should he speak. And the students, as prophesied by Sayyid Kazim himself, had a veil in front of their eyes, and they didn't see the allusion to the Bab that was sitting right in front of them. They didn't see that ray of light on his lap that Sayyid Kazim had just pointed to. I mean, it was so obvious, but no one figured it out. Now, this is all not happening in a vacuum, because the Bab's mother misses her son. She's in Shiraz, and her son was in Bushir for 5 years. Now he's been in the Atabat in Karbala for a whole year. His mother wants to see him. So the Bab's uncle arrives in towards the end of the Bab's year in Iraq, at the request of his mother, to bring her son back. "Please, I want to see my son." So he was deeply devoted to his sister, and he arrives and he meets the Bab in Karbala, and he says, "I have come to accompany you in your return to Shiraz." And no matter how much Haji Mirza Sayyid Ali insisted, the Bab refused, saying, "I intend to remain in the Atabat for some time." Sometime shortly after his uncle's arrival, the Bab met Mullah Sadiq in the courtyard of the shrine of the Imam Hussein and said to him, "My uncle has recently arrived from Shiraz, and if you wish to meet him, come to our abode." So Mullah Sadiq went to the home of the Bab, and there were a lot of ulama and merchants and dignitaries that were also present, and his uncle, Haji Mirza Sayyid Ali, who was sitting and conversing with the guests, and the Bab was serving tea and sherbet. And Mullah Sadiq spoke of the Bab and his exalted character. And Haji Mirza Sayyid Ali responded saying, "Even though our entire family is well known in Shiraz and its vicinity for our pious nature and goodly characters, yet this youth shines like a most radiant candle in our midst, and is most evident that he is cut from a different cloth. Our one wish is for him to undertake study of diverse sciences, so it would bring added honor to us. However, he refuses." So in the end, Haji Mirza Sayyid Ali interceded with Sayyid Kazim, "Please tell the Bab to come back. Maybe he'll listen to you." And the Sayyid Kazim did not want to interfere, but then Haji Mirza insisted and said his mother wants him to come back. It's important. And the Sayyid eventually transmitted the message to the Bab and said, "If it pleases you, return to Shiraz." And because the Bab knew it was the wish of Sayyid Kazim that he return to Shiraz, he agreed. And he left Karbala for Shiraz to see his mother for the first time after probably 6 years, I think. Yeah. So that's the end of part 2. Part 3 is very cool. It's about Khadija Begum, the wife of the Bab. So we're going to look at how they met. We're going to look at how they grew up and how they got married and all these things. But before we go on, I just need to drink a little bit of water because I don't usually talk this much.
While you're drinking water, you said tea and sherbet, and it just went right over my head. I mean, sherbet is what I consider ice cream. I mean, back then, ice cream?
Yep.
And maybe it was some kind of flavor of tea. I don't know.
Oh, no. It was ice cream.
Ice cream.
And not only that, sherbet is a big deal because when Abdul Baha travels to Paris and he there's like, I think they celebrated his birthday in Paris, I think, on the same day as the Declaration of the Bab, and they had sherbet. They had rosewater sherbet there. And then when he goes to the United States and he organizes a unity feast, there's this beautiful Persian rice, and they also serve sherbet. So yeah, they could.
You're sure they had ice cream back in the 1850s?
No, I'm sorry. Can I say something?
Yes.
So sharbat is we have rose water sharbat. So we sweeten the rose water, or we sweeten the orange blossom, and we add a little bit of the water to it, and that's sharbat in Farsi. So the sharbat is a drink, is not the ice cream that we eat in here. Is not. Yes, sharbat is rose water, or what do you call it? Orange blossom water, and those things sweetened, and you add water to it, or sour cherry, like you make the cherries and you use the juice. Actually, hold on for 1 second.
Okay. So it's interesting because I think that that's a good point, because this is translated in English as sherbet, which only means one thing. It's sherbet is like a water-based ice cream. It's a non-dairy ice cream.
So this is
actually syrup.
Yes, it says sharbat al-balu. So this is a syrup. You put a little bit of this at the bottom of the glass or cup, and then you add water to it and you stir it, and this is sharbat.
Okay, great. So actually it's syrup, not sherbet.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much, Joseph.
Thank you for the clarification.
Yeah, no, it's important. You know, it's I love details because I think details bring life, you know, and even a small conversation about whether it's ice cream or syrup, I think it's sweet. I think, well, literally it's sweet, but also it's sweet because we're actually talking about something that has to do with the Bab and what the Bab drank and ate. And I think that these things are very important because one of the big things about Christianity that really gets people really in love with Christianity and attached to Christianity is that they have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. And I believe that that's one of the most beautiful things about Christianity. And that's one of the things that I aim to do with my attempts at history is I want to start these conversations and develop personal relationships with the Bab and personal relationships with Baha'u'llah and personal relationships with Abdul Baha and with Haji Mirza Haidar Ali and Mirza Abul Fazl and Shoghi Effendi and Hippolyte Dreyfus. You know, this Sunday, I'm going to be giving a talk about Hippolyte Dreyfus, the first French Baha'i. And he was absolutely beloved, but not even beloved, cherished, adored by Abdul Baha and Shoghi Effendi. Abdul Baha saw him. He went to meet Abdul Baha when Abdul Baha arrived from America in Liverpool. He was one of the people waiting there. And this is a French guy in the 19th century, like super polite, super well-dressed, super elegant, super like just a really proper man. And Abdul Baha took him and kissed him on both cheeks. That's how much Abdul Baha loved Hippolyte Dreyfus. And I have so many amazing stories about him based on a book that was written recently. So it's this Sunday. I know I'm like cross-advertising, but yeah, I'm going to give you my email at the end. And if you want to hear about that, I can send you the email. So good. Any other comments on part 2, which was, you know, the Atabat, Karbila, Bushir, all of that stuff. Any questions on that before we move on to Khadija Begum?
Yes, I always wondered what was the origin of how he knew the qualities of who to look for in the Bab. And this meeting tells me that he found the qualities or the looks, the demeanor of the Bab and told them to search for those, because I think the recognition that you were talking about, the ray of light on that youth slap, that he knew a secret knowledge or kept it secret, but gave the hints or the characteristics to look for, which you do not find, at least I do not find anywhere in Christian, Jewish, or Muslim writings.
So I think that he was telling people what the Bab looked like before he met him. Because in the second chapter of the Dawnbreakers, it's very clear that Sayyid Kazim is telling people clearly what the Bab looks like before he meets the Bab. And one of the things that we have to understand about Sayyid Kazim and Sheikh Ahmad is that they were not just regular people. I mean, Shoghi Effendi called Sheikh Ahmad the herald of the Baha'i dispensation. Sheikh Ahmad was born in this nothing town in Saudi Arabia, and he left to Iraq to transform Shia Islam alone, on his own. This is his, like anybody else would say this. He said, the person's nuts. How can it change an entire religion alone, And he went there and he became mujtahid, and he read all of the prophecies and every single hadith and all the Quran backwards and forwards. And then he just, after a while, he was like, I have to go to Persia. This was another divine guidance. He went there. He was there when both the Bab and Baha'u'llah were born, and the predictions that he made and the things that he wrote about them are incredible. It would take forever to explain how much he revealed about the Bab and Baha'u'llah. And
can I say, Violetta, about the qualities that Qudus reduced it to simple mysticism, right?
What?
Recognize the Bab from walking.
Yeah.
So yeah. It can be mystical.
Yeah. I think also that's we can look at that. We can maybe try to spend some time looking at that on our own, and then maybe reconnect tomorrow about these qualities. I don't know the origin of them, but one thing we have to yeah, mom is telling to me that these are probably in the Quran somewhere, because they're talking about the promised one, and the thing about Sayyid Kazim and Sheikh Ahmad is that they have God's ear, like what they are saying is so true because they're heralding the Babi dispensation. They are being divinely guided, and the things they are saying are divinely inspired, and they are not prophets, of course, but yeah. Anyway, so we're going to start now talking about Khadija Begum, the wife of the Baba. And I knew when I first started writing this chronology, I knew that I'm going to give a big part to Khadija Begum, because it's amazing, like when you think about the three central figures in the Guardian, one of the things that really amazes me is that the Bab, Baha'u'llah, Abdul Baha, and Shoghi Effendi were all married. And they were married to incredible women. And so for me, talking about the women in their lives is something that always brings a lot of texture to the story, because you're talking about love, talking about manifestation of God, falls in love, gets married, builds a home. It's a part of the story that I think is so important. And so I just was like, this is a short section. It's not very long, but it was very important because, and really, so I'm going back in time because I'm going to start with the childhood of the Bab. So I'm going to start with the childhood of the Bab and the childhood of Khadija Begum. So it's going to cover the life of Khadija Begum from her birth in 1822 to the age of 21 in 1843 when she marries the Bab. And then we're going to look at the Bab from the age of 23 to 24 in 1842 to 1843 when he gets married to Khadija Begum. So that's what kind of we're going to do with. We're going to start with Khadija Begum's early life, so her birth in 1822 up until 1841 when the Bab is in the Atabat and exciting things start to happen. So this is just I like to illustrate kind of abstractly certain things. And this is a blurred image of Jean-François Portail's 1877 painting called Oriental Woman. So I blurred it because I didn't want people to think it was Khadija Begum, but just a vaguely Oriental woman, just very beautiful, very pure, sitting there. It's just an homage, we have no images of her. So Khadija Begum was born Khadija Sultan Shirazi in 1822, 3 years after her future husband, the Bab. Her parents were, and now this is important, it is not Haji Mirza Sayyid Ali, the uncle of the Bab. Her father's name was Mirza Siyyid Ali, and his wife is Haji Bibi. Her father, Mirza Siyyid Ali, was a merchant importing goods from Bushir. He worked in the same mercantile business as the family of the Bab, and he was the least successful member of the family. Khadija Begum, like the Bab, was also descended from the Prophet Muhammad, like the Bab, and descended from his wife, Khadija. So they were both descendants of the Bab. Now, the next... this is a little bit complicated, but this is the connections. There are two connections between the family of the Bab. And if you go to the website, you can download this. This is a really high resolution genealogical tree that I made. I just wanted to show that there's two connections between Khadija Begum and the Bab. Of course, they get married, right? But okay, let me just... They're connected in two main ways. Khadija Begum's father, so on the purple side is Khadija Begum, right? And if you look, you trace up from Khadija Begum, you can see Mirza Sayyid Ali, right? Okay, so Mirza Sayyid Ali is her father. So Mirza Sayyid Ali, and then if you trace the Bab, you see his mom here, Fatima Begum. His mom's father was Mirza Muhammad Hussein, who's the grandfather of the Bab. And Mirza Muhammad Hussein's brother was Mirza Sayyid Ali, who is the father of Khadija Begum. So it's complicated, but Khadija Begum's dad is the Bab's mother's uncle. Okay, so the father of the mother of the Bab, the father of the mother of the Bab, and the father of Khadija Begum were brothers. Okay, all right. The other connection is really interesting. Khadija Begum had an older sister called Zahra Begum, who's better known as Ukhti Haram, the sister of the honorable wife. And she also had two older half siblings from her mother's first marriage. So her mother was Haji Bibi. She's married to the uncle of Fatima Begum, the mother of the Bab, Mirza Sayyid Ali. But she had children from a previous marriage. And her daughter from a previous marriage is called Hajiye Bibi Janjan. Okay? Hajiye Bibi Janjan is the half-sister of Khadija Begum from another father. And she is married to the Bab's guardian, Haji Mirza Sayyid Ali, the brother of his mom. Okay? Those are the two connections between the Khadija Begum and the Bab. So they're not really cousins, you know, it's like grandfather's brother kind of thing. But the uncle of the Bab who took him in is married to Khadija Begum's half-sister. So anyway, complicated. So yeah, when they were children, they were neighbors and playmates between 1822 and 1834 when the Bab went to Bushir. So the house where Khadija Begum grew up, this is not it. This is just a Persian house from that time, drawn by a French guy. They were neighbors and playmates. Their houses were next door to each other. And the children of all the households played together, and the Bab really didn't join in. You know, we saw that yesterday when we were talking about his childhood. He didn't really join in to play, but he was always very kind and very considerate. And by the time Khadija Begum got to the age of 14, 15, she couldn't play with the children anymore because she had attained the age of maturity. And we don't know how much education she had, but we do know that she talked a lot to Munir Khanum, when Munir Khanum went to the Holy Land to marry Abdul Baha, and she's very well-spoken, really well-spoken. And so she's very, very intelligent, but we don't know details about her education. But we do know she was separated from the Bab for 6 years, and the Bab went to Bushir. So she dreamt about the Bab when the Bab was in Bushir. She had these very spiritual dreams of the Bab. She saw him in a verdant plain filled with flowers, and his radiant face was turned towards the Qibli at Mecca in an attitude of prayer. He was wearing a green outer coat called a labadi, on which Quranic verses were embroidered in threads of gold. And one of the verses is called the verse of light, Ayatul Nur. It's the chapter 24, verse 35 in the Quran. So the light was emanating from the Bab, and the dream brought Khadija Begum so much happiness, like such an intense feeling of happiness, that she woke up. Like, have you ever woken up from a dream because you were so intensely happy? And after this dream, she knew that the Bab was a great being. And her heart became completely filled with love for him, but she didn't tell anyone about her dream. So now we come to 1842, and Khadija Begum is reunited with the Bab. Finally, his uncle managed to convince him to come, and he is back in Shiraz in 1842. So several months after the Bab returns, he begins to speak about going back to the Atabat, and his mother panics for real. She does not want him to go back to Iraq. So she grows anxious, and she begins to make plans for his marriage to Khadija Begum, her niece. The Bab and Khadija Begum were now both in their 20s, adults, and Fatima Begum started making things happen. She began to set things in motion. And she spoke to her brother, Haji Mirza Siyyid Ali, and got him to sign off on it. And he thought, oh, it's a great idea. Let's get this done. Let's get the young people married here. In 1842, when the Bab was getting ready to get married, he started creating his new household. And this include our very best friend from part one, Haji Mubarak. Haji Mubarak was the servant who had raised the Bab from the age of 7. He's 15 years older than the Bab. And he had always worked for the Bab's family ever since he had arrived to Iran from Ethiopia at the age of, he was very young. So after his father's death, the Bab had spent a lot of time with Haji Mubarak. And he really saw him as a father figure, and he had complete trust in him. And he wanted him with him. So not only that, he had very, very deep personal attachment to Haji Mubarak, which is incredible when you see that there's this bond between this manifestation of God and his Ethiopian black-skinned servant that goes beyond master servant. It is really, the Bab really saw him like a father figure, and he respected him, and he listened to his advice. And not only that, in his business, he also relied on him for bookkeeping and accounting. So Yeah, he was so well educated. So Mubarak joined the Bab's family, and his quarters where he slept and lived were in the southern courtyard of the Bab's house. And that's why you have a picture here of the courtyard of the Bab's house. Now, I confess, I don't know the geography of the courtyard, so I don't know where the southern the southern courtyard is. But anyway, this is the courtyard. So it's not far from here that Haji Mubarak lived. So in May 1842, Khadija Begum had a dream. She saw Fatimeh, the daughter of the Prophet Muhammad, that visited her home to discuss a proposal of marriage. And years and years and years later, Munireh Khanum, on her way to the Holy Land to get married to Abdul Baha, she told her this whole story. And she said that I dreamed a dream in which Fatimeh, the daughter of Muhammad, came to me and said, "Arise, I desire that you become the wife of my son." And now remember, the Bab is descended from Fatimeh and from Fatimeh's son, right? So I desire that you become the wife of my son. I mean, that's literally the Bab. So majestic she looked as she stood, tall, slender, graceful, so wonderful, so marvelous, her loveliness of expression, her glorious countenance, that I could no longer gaze upon her, but I looked down and I was feeling overcome with awe and all of unworthy of so high an honor. I did not speak of this vision to my sisters. They would have thought me to be filled with pride and self-assertion. But the vision filled my thought day and night. It seemed to unfold me in a kind of sacred atmosphere of joy indescribable. The next day, Fatimeh Begum, the Bab's mother, and the grandmother of the Bab called on Khadija Begum's mom, Haji Bibi. It was custom in their house that whenever the Bab's grandmother came to visit, everyone would rush to greet her. They would kiss her shoulders, and then they would wait at the threshold of the room for her permission to enter and take a seat. She was very venerable. She was very respected. She was just such an important member of the family. And everyone would keep silent until she addressed them. And only the Bab's mother and Khadija Begum could sit with her when she came. So just imagine how respected she was. After everyone was seated on this day, Khadija Begum served everyone sharbat, a type of syrup made from flour and herbal extracts mixed with sugar. Thank you for the heart. After serving the syrup, Khadija Begum left the room and her two older sisters, Zahra Begum and Hajiya Bibi Jan, entered. Hajiya Bibi Jan, you will remember, is the one who was married to the Bab's guardian and maternal uncle, Haji Mirza Siyyid Ali. Not long after, and the reason I repeat this a lot is because I had a lot of trouble with the Persian names, and I found that repetition really helps. So not long after this, everyone rose up to leave, and to Khadija Begum's surprise, the Bab's mother kissed her on the forehead, just like her ancestor, both of their ancestors, because this Fatimeh she dreamed of that kissed her on the forehead, she is her ancestor, but she is also the Bab's mother's ancestor, right? They're all descended from 13 centuries ago, from this one person. And when Hajiya Bibi saw the puzzled look on her daughter's face, she said, "The kiss of Fatimeh Begum on your head implied that she's asking your hand in marriage to the Bab. You see, the dream you had last night is coming true." Khadija Begum was overjoyed. I mean, by this time, the young Bab, can you imagine? He was very highly respected in the family. He was an amazing merchant. He was very well considered. His behavior, his demeanor, his character. I mean, everyone was convinced that Khadija Begum had known her whole life he was amazing. And then she had this dream when he was in Bushir, so she knew. And she said that from that day, I felt a great stirring within my heart. It seemed the gate of God's mercy and abundant bounty had been flung open before my face. I felt immeasurably proud of my coming union. And, you know, I think it's really special when you hear the wife of a manifestation of God talk about her marriage, talk about her husband, any kind of little shred that we get from these women, like Munir Hanum about Abdul Baha, or I don't think we have anything really from Asiya Hanum of Baha'u'llah. But yeah, it's really precious in our faith, really. So now we come to the actual marriage between the Bab and Khadija Begum, and we are really lucky. We have this document for both Baha'u'llah and the Bab. We have a marriage contract. This is the marriage contract. And so this is the top of the marriage contract, and this is about the top and the middle, and then this is the bottom, you know. And these marriage contracts, they talk about the dowry, but they also talk about the people. They talk about how they're really special, and they're really wonderful youths, and they're just a beautiful character and very chaste. And there's all these little spaces where there's like stamps and things. I mean, it's incredible. And we have this. I mean, how lucky we are to have this. Wow. The process of arranging the marriage was very swift, very smooth. The negotiations took place very quickly. There was an exchange of gifts. The engagements was formalized, and the marriage took place 2 months after Fatima Begum's visit to Khadija Begum on the 25th of August, 1842. So in a little more than a month from now is the anniversary. In Khadija Begum's family home, and it was in the presence of merchants, noblemen, the ulama of the province of Fars, where Shiraz is, and it was officiated by someone who's going to play a big role in the life of the Bab later on in the next few 3 parts. His name is Sheikh Abu Turab. He is the Imam Jumi of Shiraz. He is the Imam who leads the Friday prayer, distinguished for his intellect and virtue. And every one of the guests marveled at the beauty of the bride and the groom. And so it was customary at the time. The reception had 2 celebrations, one for the men, one for the women. The men gathered in the house of the Bab's uncle, Haji Mirza Siyyid Ali, and the women gathered in the residence of Khadija Begum's father, right next door. And Khadija Begum was just intensely aware of how lucky she was and the blessings of God. And she said, "No words can ever convey my wonderful feelings of good fortune, and his kindness towards me and his care for me were indescribable. He and his mother alike showered me with kindness and consideration." Khadija Begum was not married very long, but whatever amount of time she was married was just extraordinarily happy. She adored her husband. She was deeply happy with him, and she adored her mother-in-law. And they lived together, and it just was a very united family. The Bab actually speaks about his wedding in the Qayyumul Asma in 2 different places. He says, "O concourse of light, hear my call from the point of fire in this ocean of snow-white water on this crimson earth. Verily I am God, besides whom there is no other God. On the most exalted throne, a beloved noblewoman, bearing the same name, Khadija, as the beloved of the first friend, the Prophet Muhammad, was wedded to this great remembrance. And verily I cause the angels of heaven and the denizens of paradise on the day of the covenant to bear witness in truth to God's remembrance." This is an extremely central point in the life of the Bab, is that both he and his wife are descended from the Prophet Muhammad. And both he and his wife are descended from the Prophet Muhammad and Khadija and their daughter Fatima, right? And Khadija was named for Khadija, her ancestor from 13 centuries ago. And Khadija, her ancestor from 13 centuries ago, was married to the Prophet Muhammad and was the first one to believe in him. And Khadija was married to the Bab, and both of them are descendants from the Prophet Muhammad. And she is Khadija, like her ancestor. Like her ancestor, she is married to a manifestation of God. And like her ancestor, she's going to be the first one to recognize him. So that's very, very central. It's core, very core. And the other thing that very few people know is that both the Bab and his wife Khadija are martyrs. The Bab, of course, we know was martyred by 750 rifles. Khadija was elevated to the station of martyr by Baha'u'llah upon her passing in 1882. And we're going to look at that at the end of this chronology. I have a section on that, but I just wanted to just make a point that Khadija Begum is incredibly important. And the other place in the Qayyum al-Asma where the Bab talks about his wedding is when he says, in truth, I have become betrothed before the throne of God with Sarah, that is to say, the dearly beloved, because dearly beloved is derived from dearly beloved. The dearly beloved is Muhammad, which signifies that Sarah was a Siyyid. So it's a very complicated Quranic reference to the fact that his wife is a descendant of Muhammad. So he was betrothed to a descendant of the Prophet Muhammad. In truth, I have taken the angels of heaven and those who dwell in paradise as witnesses of our betrothal. The Bab speaks about his mother in the Qayyum al-Asma. He speaks about his wife in the Qayyum al-Asma, speaks about his wedding in the Qayyum al-Asma, he speaks about his son who died in the Qayyum al-Asma. One of the things that I like to make very clear whenever I give any kind of talk is that the manifestations of God and Abdul Baha were very, very generous with their references to their personal lives in whatever kind of utterances, spoken, pilgrim notes, or holy writings they did. And I think that we have to learn to be intimate. That is a prerequisite for being effective in teaching the faith and for being effective in having really intimate relationships with people, because the Bab is not afraid to talk about his wife and his marriage and his son in the commentary on the Surah of Joseph. So intimacy is very important, not in a really uncomfortable way, like there is such a thing as too much information, but I'm talking about really on a spiritual level of intimate communion with people in our communities, with our clusters, with our nuclei. So in between the 5th of August 1842 and the 22nd of May 1844, so between their marriage and the Bab's declaration, we're going to look at the married life of the Bab. What was it like to be married to the Bab before he declared? What was it like? The young couple, young, happy couple, was deeply, deeply in love. So they were just really in love, really happy. The Bab was very considerate and very kind towards his wife. She was very loved. She was very well treated by both her husband and her mother-in-law. She loved them both with all her heart. They were very young. They were very beautiful. They were very respected. They were very admired. Probably people were very jealous of them, probably because they were wealthy, they were beautiful, they were in love, they were happy. The Bab's character was so holy that their close friends and relatives just really respected him. And the household of the Bab consisted a very interesting household. It was the mother of the Bab and Khadija Begum, and then Haji Mubarak, the servant who was really close to the Bab and helped him with his business, and Fize, who was a woman, an Ethiopian woman. And Fize would stay with Khadija Begum after the Bab's martyrdom for 40 years. And they lived together for 40 years in the same house. And when Khadija Begum passed away in 1882, Fize died 3 hours later. So look at the relationships of the manifestation of God, the Bab, had this intensely close, loving, respectful relationship with Haji Mubarak, an African man, and his wife had a 40-year-long, intense, beautiful friendship, companionship, relationship, just association with an African woman. That is the oneness of humanity, my friends. When Khadija Begum would think of those early days of her marriage, she would say, "No words can ever convey my wonderful feeling of good fortune." And she said that she just had these feelings of bliss. I found myself completely detached from material things and my heart attracted only by him. I could see by his behavior, his words, his tranquility and dignity that he was a great person, but I never imagined that he was the promised one, the Qaim. So the Bab had a really interesting daily routine. And up here, these images that you see here, the top one is the outskirts of Shiraz where the Bab liked to walk. And I Those are from the Dawnbreakers, and I'm not very good at Photoshop, but I tried to colorize them to bring them to life a little bit. So these are the outskirts of Shiraz where the Bab liked to walk. And I'm going to tell you what part of his routine that was. So this is what the routine was for those first couple of years when they were married. The Bab would rise an hour before dawn. He would wash, and then he would perform his ablutions, and then he would go to the upper floor of the house, the declaration chamber, and he recited tablets of visitation, prayers, supplications, and invocations of the names of God. And then after sunrise, Fize, the woman servant, fired up the samovar and prepared and prepared it in Fatime Begum's room. And the samovar is a really interesting way of preparing tea. It's like this giant thing. I think I showed it earlier. This is a samovar. See, this giant thing is filled with water. And then there's like a little tiny teapot of concentrated tea that you put at the top that's kept hot from the steam from the boiling water that's in the samovar. And then you like take a teeny weeny bit of this super concentrated tea, and then you add water from the samovar, so you can have tea all day long, because that's what Persians do. And honestly, that's what everybody should do, is have tea all day long, just like the Persians, because I think that's the secret to life. Yeah. So then once the Bab had finished praying, he would come down and have his morning tea with his wife and his mother, which sounds like, oh man, how nice would it have been to be there? I would like to go there too, have tea with them. After tea, the Bab went to Shiraz, to his uncle's trading house in the Sarai-i-Mulk, the customs sarai, and some afternoons he took long walks in the fields outside the city. So these are the fields where he would walk. And these pictures were taken by many people, including Hand of the Cause, Zikr al-Khadem, at the request of the Guardian in the 30s, I think. They went to Iran and just went click, 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 taking all the pictures that were associated near and far with the Bab for the Dawnbreakers. That's where those pictures come from. So after he came home, and after he had walked in the countryside, the Bab would return about an hour after sunset, and he would do devotions again. He would chant his prayers, all those same things he did in the morning. And then he devoted the early part of the evening to writing letters and writing meditations. And then in the evenings, he would ask Khadija Begum to give him his papers and his account book. And Khadija Begum noticed that these books were not business records, and she occasionally asked her husband, "What are these papers?" And the Bab smiled. "These are account books on the people of the world." So when he was working on these mysterious account books, and an unexpected guest arrived, the Bab covered the papers over with a cloth. And 3 hours after sunset, the Bab ate dinner and retired to his chambers 1 hour later for the night. And that is how life was. Very pleasant, very sweet, until 22 May 1844, when Mullah Hussein came to their door and their life changed forever. So this is one of the earliest works of the Bab. It's called the Fis-i Suluk 1, On the Virtuous Journey 1. It's a short epistle that was revealed before the death of Sayyid Kazim. And in this work, the Bab is focusing on the inner mystical meanings of religious law. He interprets rituals as a spiritual journey, and he speaks about the 4 layers of the divine covenant in this work. So the content of this epistle is very complex. It talks about the essence of religion, the spiritual journey of the individual, the realization of divine love, a divine love that can only be realized when a person attains one of the 4 manifestations of love, which are the 4 pillars of the covenant of God. And these 4 pillars of the covenant of God are also levels that are inseparable from each other, and they are manifestations and expressions of God's love for his creation. It's very complicated, but if you want to know, these are the 4 pillars of God's love: the unity of God, prophethood, the imams, and gatehood. So it's a tablet that's short, but it's very, very powerful. And the Bab associates these 4 levels, the unity of God, the prophethood, the imams, and the gatehood, with the heart, the intellect, the soul, and the body. And the 4-tier structure of this tablet reflects the Bab's attachment and interests in the teaching of Sheikh Ahmad and Siyyid Kazim. So Todd Lawson wrote a paper on this book and on this tablet, and he interprets that the Bab's interpretation of the next world in this tablet is a distinctive Shaykhi teaching. It's kind of like a synergy between Sufism and Shaykhism. So there's an annotated translation on this that is available on the Irfan Colloquia. And if you go to this section in my chronology, you are going to see a hyperlink, so you can click on it and read the translation for this epistle. So this is actually, we have this. This is the earliest writing of the Bab that we have, that was written sometime before the revelation in 1842, 1843. So there you go. There you have it. And you're going to see this over and over again in this chronology. I tend to give descriptions that are quite detailed of the writings of the Bab, because I feel like it is one of those things where we have the selections from the writings of the Bab, but we do not know the individual tablets that he wrote as well as we know like Tajaliyat or Tarazat or Bisharat or, you know, the Lahi Ardiba or the Kitabi Ahd like Baha'u'llah. We are so much more familiar with the individual works of Baha'u'llah than we are of the Bab. And I really, really wanted the Bab to come through in his revelation in this chronology. So I've spent a long time, really thank you to Dr. Nader Saidi for Gate of the Heart, which made this possible, and all of the scholars like Todd Lawson who wrote papers on this that made this possible. So it's going to be very complicated, my friends, because the Bab's writings were very complicated. So this is a piece of art that I did. It's kind of my style of art, about a dream that hi, Alexander. My sweetheart. This is a dream that Khadija Begum has that is the beginning of the end. It's very sad. Things are sad. I'm going to speak about the death of a little baby, so this may not be appropriate for children. The dream itself is not bad. It's okay for small children. It's just a dream about a lion. So Khadija Begum had a dream not long after her wedding that a fearsome lion was standing in the courtyard of their house, and she found herself with the arms around the lion, and the lion dragged her around the courtyard with her hanging on to him by his neck, and he dragged her twice around the whole courtyard, and she woke up, and she told her husband about the dream, and the Bab said, "You awoke too soon. Your dream portends that our life together will not last more than 2.5 years. So the lion dragging her around the courtyard twice, that was 2 years. If she had dreamed the dream the entire time, the lion would have dragged her around the courtyard 2.5 times because they had 2.5 years together." So, you know, the Bab's marriage to Khadija Begum was a very modern marriage. They had very frank conversations. She brought things up with the Bab immediately. What are these account books? What is this dream I had? What is that? What is this? And he always answered her extremely frankly. They had an extremely modern marriage, very communicative, very open, very honest, very frank with each other. This is a sad section. This is a section maybe not for little children who want to hear about something like this. This is about the birth and passing of the Bab's only son. Yeah, but it's important. So about a year after their marriage, Khadija Begum gave birth to the couple's only child, a boy named Ahmad. And while she was in labor, there came a moment when she almost died. So Fatima Begum ran out of the birthing chamber and told the Bab. The Bab took a mirror that was next to him. This is a 19th century mirror, a Persian mirror. It's a small mirror. I have no idea what the mirror that the Bab used looked like, but I love this mirror. And I think the design I did is pretty cute. So this is symbolic, not literal. So he took a mirror that was next to him, and the Bab wrote a prayer on it. And we do not know what prayer it was. He gave the mirror to his mother, and told her to hold it in front of Khadija Begum. And I want you to think about this for a minute. Like, it's good to stop and think about the implications. The Bab took a mirror and he wrote a prayer on it. So a mirror reflects. So while he was writing the prayer, first of all, he's a manifestation of God writing a prayer. That's important. Second of all, if he's holding the mirror and writing a prayer on the mirror, his face is reflected in the mirror. And then he gives this mirror to his mother and he tells her, put this mirror in front of her face. So then his wife's face is now reflected in that mirror that was just reflected the face of a manifestation of God and has a prayer of a manifestation of God written on it. So that's kind of like, I like to think of that moment kind of like that, you know, like both the faces of the Bab and Khadija Begum were reflected in that mirror. So she held it in front of Khadija Begum's face, and Khadija Begum safely delivered the little baby boy whose name was Ahmad. Tragically, the beloved baby did not live long, and we do not know the date or circumstances of his death. Fatima Begum was heartbroken, the mother of the Bab. She was heartbroken, but she was also angry. She confronted her son and said, you know, you had the power to save your wife's life when she was in labor dying. Why couldn't you save your son? And the Bab smiled at her and basically replied that he was not meant to leave any descendants. He was not meant to have any children. And his mother was not happy, but she would never be able to get more out of him. But we do know where baby Ahmad was buried, and he was buried nearby that tree marks his resting place. And on the left, that building is the Bibi Dukhtaran shrine. And these are also my badly colorized versions of these Dawnbreaker photos. But I thought that, you know, it's nicer than black and white, I think. Anyway, 112 years later, on the first day of Rizvan, 1955, the local spiritual assembly of Shiraz reinterred the remains of Ahmad, the only son of the Bab, the manifestation of God, in the Baha'i cemetery of Shiraz. And I want to read you a couple of things that the Bab wrote about his son, Ahmad, in the Qayyumul Asma, I think. All praise be to God who bestowed upon the solace of the eyes, the Bab, in his youth, Ahmad. We did verily raise him up unto God. O solace of the eyes, the Bab, be patient in what God hath ordained for thee. Verily he doeth whatsoever he willeth. He is the all-wise in the exercise of his justice. He is thy Lord, the Ancient of Days, and praised be he in whatever he ordereth. And this is really special, friends. In a chapter of the Qayyumul Asma, the Bab is speaking. So the Qayyumul Asma was revealed in 40 days, starting on May 23rd, 1844. And this is such an important commentary on the Surah of Joseph from the Quran. But in the Qayyumul Asma, the Bab speaks to Khadija Begum directly. He addresses her. He says, O well-beloved, value highly the grace of the great remembrance, for it cometh from God the loved one. Thou shalt not be a woman like other women, if thou obeyest in the cause of truth, the greatest truth. Know thou the great bounty conferred upon thee by the Ancient of Days, and take pride in being the consort of the well-beloved, who is loved by God the greatest. Sufficient unto thee is this glory, which cometh unto thee from God, the all-wise, the all-praised. Be patient in all that God hath ordained concerning the Bab and his family. And listen to this. Verily, thy son Ahmad is with Fatima, the sublime, in the sanctified paradise. Now, have you noticed how often Fatima comes up in the life of the Bab? From the fact that she's his ancestor and his wife's ancestor. And now she's holding Ahmad, their son, in the sanctified paradise. And, you know, like it just comes up and up and up and up and up, you know? She's extremely important. And you know what? That's it for today. Tomorrow is the declaration of the Bab. Ha ha! Okay, now, questions. Comments,
You said
complaints.
you said Fatima keeps coming up. And-
Yeah.
When he was with Manusha Khan in Isfahan, his second wife's name was Fatima. Do we know anything about that Fatima?
Yes, you know what? I'm going to be very frank with you. I did not even put her in the chronology, and I didn't even put Baha'u'llah's second and third wives in the chronology. I'm going to tell you why. Because those marriages were at kind of just like paper, you know, like when the Bab was in Isfahan, he had to live in a house and he could not wash the floors, make the food, make the tea. So a woman had to do that, but he could not be with a woman servant if he was not married. So he had to marry basically Fatima, who was his servant. So she served him. And so Fatima came in one day when he was writing papers, and she met him and she exchanged one word with him. And then she, I guess, washed and did the food. And that's the only time they were ever in the same room at the same time. And that is the entirety of the marriage of the Bab to his second wife. Now, this Fatima, bless her soul, poor woman, has suffered more than probably any other female in Baha'i history. And I do not say this lightly, because when Baha'u'llah went to Sulaymaniyeh after all of the visions in Baghdad, Mirza Yahya took this Fatima and married her. And then he gave her like a parcel, like a basket of apples. He gave her to Muhammad Ali to marry. They both married this woman, the second wife of the Bab. They stained the name of the Bab in a way that broke Baha'u'llah's heart in a million pieces. And the mother of the Bab had a very difficult time accepting the faith because of the insult to her son's name that Mirza Yahya and Muhammad Ali did by marrying his second wife, both of them within 1 month. So this poor woman had a really sad life after she left Isfahan. But she was really a servant, you know, she served the Bab. And she herself has this thing that she says. Actually, if you look in Leaves of the Twin Divine Trees, there's a chapter on Fatima, and there's very little information on her. She was only in the present of the Bab for just this tiny little bit.
I'm assuming no children?
Oh, definitely not. They were together for a matter of weeks.
But no consummation of the marriage?
You know what? I do not like talking about these kinds of things when it comes to manifestations of God, but I would believe the answer is no, because they were alone together for only one moment when the Bab was working on paperwork and he met her, and then that's it. The marriage was a formality, was a piece of paper he had to sign because he needed to have a maid, and he didn't have a maid, and he couldn't have her. The thing is, he had to marry her because he needed a maid and she was the maid. And if he didn't marry her, he would have ruined her relationship for the rest of her life, because she would have been in the same house as a man and not been married to him. Do you know what I mean? Like, Persia in the 19th century was so, gosh, what's the word I'm looking for? Inflexible, okay? Like, she couldn't just come and wash the floors and leave, because everybody would think that they would have had sex, you know? So they had to marry for it to be okay. It was okay for him to have a second wife. He was supposed to have a second wife because everybody had second wives. He was in Isfahan so long. He was in Isfahan like months. I'm not sure how long he was after he married Fatima, maybe like a matter of weeks, because I think he left shortly after that. And that was when he just went into prison, went towards Tehran, and then went to Azerbaijan. But the portion on Isfahan is very exciting. I have like, oh gosh, it's really cool. I did not even know the Bab had been to, I'd be honest with you guys, when I first started working on the chronology earlier this year, I didn't even know the Bab had been to Isfahan. And then when I learned about it and I dug and dug and dug and dug, I found so much information.
So he was never divorced?
Oh, guys, I just have to tell you, there's in the chat, there's a very important piece of information from Peter. Fatima was mur'a, a temporary marriage. Of course, there was no offspring, or we would definitely know of it.
So there would have been a divorce?
No, no, of course not. No,
Well, what does
No.
temporary mean then?
I don't know. Like Airbnb, you know, it's temporary, but you don't have to officially divorce Airbnb when you leave, you know. It's just like,
Okay,
and
I'll just leave it. I'll
and then
just
she-
leave it at that. I'll have to investigate it myself.
I
She
think
was-
they call it sighe. I think they call it sighe. It's like you can, if you want to just leave or go for a walk with somebody, even as of today, you do read something as a sighe, but you are not married completely. You are
Thank
not
you.
act. You are not, you know.
Thank you
You have-
very much.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, and if anybody wants to add a little bit on this, we're talking about something extremely important. You know, obviously we're talking about details of the marriage of the Bab and this and that, but I like to spend time on details like this because I think it makes it really real. The fact that there was such a thing in Iran in the 19th century is a temporary marriage that's like Peter Terry said, is exactly like an Airbnb marriage. You know, you like need to go somewhere, you need a maid, you marry this woman, you never have sex with her, you never see her, she's in the house, she cleans the house, she makes you your food, then you leave Isfahan, you don't have to divorce her. You know, she's going to Airbnb marriage, maybe somebody else, you know, like this super weird for us now because marriage is such a big deal, but that's what it was like back then, you know. Quanta, please. Yes.
Thank you. I'm originally from Turkey, and I think that the focus here should be that in the society, when a woman is seen with a man, and that there may be rumors, there may be
Yes.
things that are contrary to the truth. So to preserve her dignity, to preserve her honor, for the sake of protecting her, that was done. So because of the patriotic, I mean, not patriotic, patriarchal society. So I think it was done for a spiritual and moral reasons, so that the woman would not be seen as somebody, well, you know, people come and go. So I think it was done to preserve her dignity.
Thank you. That's an excellent, excellent, excellent point, because one of the things that we've established in the first 3 parts of this chronology is how incredibly courteous the Bab was. So this marriage, we have to really be okay with it, because according to the customs of the time, it was not in any way like his marriage to Khadija Begum, where they would sleep together and she would wake up in the middle of the night and have a dream and tell him, you know, I had a dream, you know, and they would have tea. That is not what it was like with Fatima. But you have to see that marriage exactly as Quanta just said. It is just it's an extreme courtesy to save her reputation. You know, it's and that's, you have to always think of the Bab as being like the most ultimately respectful and courteous person that you could possibly meet. Go ahead, John.
Well, China has this tradition too. I mean, we can't judge marriage by current society. What about Africa? This is the first time we are in the age of the woman. It's been the age of man. Men were fighters, they were protectors, and they had obligations. So marriage had all kinds of different implications.
Yeah. Yeah, it's important to take these things and really look at them and be like, hold them up to the light and be frank with them, you know. But you know what? The reason that I never put any of the wives in my chronologies is because I did not want that second or third wife, even if it was a marriage of courtesy, to detract from my set. I'm very, very focused in my chronologies. Everything has to point to the Bab and Baha'u'llah and Abdul Baha and just how much we can learn about them. Everything I can find, I put in there. And I really I consult a lot with my father when I write these things. And I said, you know, I just feel like it's going to be distracting, you know, that's all people are going to remember. And it's going to be printed there. It's going to be on the internet. It's going to be so visible. And you know, I'm not trying to hide it. I just don't want to put something in that's going to, I'll give you a good example. You know, I gave a talk on Yazd. And Yazd was like, first of all, you have to understand that Baha'is who come from Yazd are like really, really, really devout Baha'is. And when I gave this talk on Yazd, there were like 30 people from Yazd that were there. I was like, such an amazing atmosphere. They gave us the Yazdi accent, and we laughed and we cried, and it was so. And the thing with Yazd is that's a Zoroastrian city, and Zoroastrians, they have this really crazy death ritual, which is called the Tower of Silence, which they take the body of the person who died and they dump it down the Tower of Silence. And then the floor is made out of stone. So because the bodies are not supposed to touch the ground, because the ground is sacred for Zoroastrians. And so they don't bury them. They just dump them in this tower. And then the birds of prey come, and I guess rats too, and they just eat the body and pick out the bones, you know? And that's what happens. And so these towers of silence are the first thing you see when you come to Yazd back in the 19th century. And I was so excited. I did this whole thing on this. I had a whole slide on this. And then I consulted with my dad, and I was like, Dad, if I mention this thing about these towers of silence, that's all people are going to remember. They're not going to remember the hands of the cause that came there. They're not going to remember the conversion of Zoroastrians. They're not going to remember So I took it out, you know, because history is narrative. What we say about the manifestations of God, how we say it, the things we choose to say creates a narrative that is going to be the first impression of someone who we teach the faith to, you know? So sometimes you got to take the Tower of Silence out, you know? Like I remember like once I met someone and they said, oh, you're Baha'i. I'm like, yeah, I know everything about Baha'i. I'm like, really? They're like, yeah, you believe the next manifestation of God is going to be an alien. And I'm like, Tower of Silence, you know? Like that's a person who taught the faith to someone and told them about their crazy little Tower of Silence thing. And then that's the only thing that person knows about the faith, you know? So teaching the faith and history is narrative. We have to be very careful what we say. I'm sure you've all had experiences like this.
Violetta, thank you so much. It's actually past time. So
oh, I'm so sorry.
Close out for today, but
See you tomorrow.
Yep, tomorrow, same time.
Same time, same place, same Zoom.
Thank you all.
I love you all. See you tomorrow.